Okay, I'm Nancy Coffey. I help to lead the Chairman's Circle. I'm thrilled to welcome you all to this third installment of our webinar series on culture. Each piece of the series has featured our Chairman's Circle investors. We really think it's a great opportunity to hear from these companies that are driving change and leading some of our most successful enterprises here in our community. It is my delight to introduce to you our moderator for today's session, Daphne Large. Daphne is founder and CEO of DataFacts. She is a brilliant strategist, a visionary, a straight shooter, an awesome mentor to me, for which I am so grateful. And she is going to take it away. I just want to mention to you all as we get started, this is a typical Zoom meeting. There is a Q&A button on your screen. As Daphne and David are conversing, as David is sharing his presentation, please start to feed your questions into that Q&A function. That'll help us to keep the conversation moving. Thanks to all of you for being with us. Daphne, take it away.
Thank you, Nancy. I'm so delighted to be a part of this series. At DataFacts, we think about culture a lot, and we understand that our company is made up of a lot of unique individuals, and that we can't force culture, but what we can do is try to lead by example and provide a workplace where the culture that we want to have has a chance to thrive. And one of the things we try to do is keep it a priority to inspire and encourage our team to continue to make those positive contributions and to focus on the positive so we can keep that culture connection going. And that really creates a sense of belonging. And so I'm excited to learn from David today about belonging and the culture connection. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce David Dart. David joined ServiceMaster in August of 2018 as the Chief Human Resources Officer. He joined the company from Veritas Technologies, a global software company headquartered in Mountain View, California, where he was the Senior Vice President and Chief Human Resources Officer. Previously, David was the Vice President of Human Resources for the Specialty Materials Division of Celanese, a $3 billion business unit where he led development and deployment of the company's global strategy, as well as the implementation of new performance indicators to increase both profit and revenue through talent development and behavior change. Earlier in his career, he was the Vice President of HR at Ecolab, where he launched global culture transformation and alignment initiatives in 20+ divisions. He's also served in both U.S. and global HR leadership positions at Bissell, ConAgra, and Amgen. He served in the U.S. Navy as a logistics officer and has a BA in biophysics and an MBA from the University of Michigan. So David, we really appreciate your deep HR experience and look forward to your perspective on culture. And just a quick reminder to the audience to turn in those questions for us, because we're going to have a great Q&A at the end. So David, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Daphne. I really appreciate the intro. Very kind. So I'm going to share my screen here because it's I'm a visual learner myself, so hopefully this will help facilitate some of the discussion, because there's really a lot to cover here when you talk about culture, and it's important for, I think, all leaders to take a step back and assess the culture on a regular basis, because you can end up with culture by accident, and that's not something any leader would want to have. So I've been fortunate to be at companies that had to go through culture transformation. In our case, I don't know if you've heard about ServiceMaster's big changes, but we just sold our ServiceMaster brands business. ServiceMaster as a whole was just over $2 billion in total revenue, and about $200 million of that revenue that we recognized was associated with the brands like ServiceMaster Restore, ServiceMaster Clean, Mary Maids, Furniture Medic, Amerispec, and so we have those iconic brands, and but they were all franchised. So even though it was about $2.5 billion in revenue, we only recognized about a little over $200 million worth of that as our own revenue. The rest of it was associated with Terminix, and we just actually have signed a letter of intent for sales. So we signed a deal with a company that does franchising quite well. It's a private equity firm, and they're going to take the ServiceMaster brands business. So we're going to go through a big change here. on top of everything else that's going on, and plus our new CEO, who will now be with RemainCo, which is Terminix, he starts on the 15th of September. So the change never stops, I guess. But 2020 has been quite a year. And I took this slide from my dear colleagues at Cleo Jameson. When Daphne mentioned my time at Ecolab, we had a cultural transformation that we were going through, and Cleo Jameson Consulting Group is the one that helped me with that. And I also worked with them at Celanese, and now they're doing some work with us here at ServiceMaster on the heels of the George Floyd murder and the subsequent issues that have happened as a part of that. And they came in and talked to us a little bit about what we're doing right now is living in kind of perpetual whitewater. And that's pretty tough to do. And they put this slide together to say, look, all these things are going to elicit a reaction. And, is this really the new normal? And then is your culture ready to withstand some of what's all happening right now? Because 2020 has really been a tumultuous year. And how are you thinking about that as an organization? Because ultimately, you got to engineer the culture that you want. Culture is going to be, it's going to happen no matter what you do. It's a natural byproduct of us all interacting with each other. But we've just not been, if you go back to the slide, how we're interacting with each other has just dramatically changed over the course of the last few months. So you have to think about that as a leader in your organization of how can you then nurture it. And I like the garden analogy when you talk about culture engineering, because if we're not keeping track of your garden, if you're not caring for it, if you're not weeding it, because right now you could argue there's probably tons of weeds that just got thrown into our beautiful garden, wherever business you might be a part of, something is going to grow in there. And if you're not watering it well and nurturing it and pruning it and doing the things that you need to do, what are you going to end up with? What's on the left or what's on the right? So, it's kind of, you have to ask yourself, what kind of garden do you want to grow, particularly in this current situation that we're dealing with? And so I'd like to call it culture by design versus culture by default. And you might think everything's great. Everything was good before all this happened, and boy, did we weather this storm really well. We're still all in it together. The issue is that there is a business case behind culture. And so this is a little dated, it's from 2018, but the investor trends are clearly telling us they want to know what is going on in your culture. If you look at some of the culture scandals that have occurred, you don't have to go all the way back to Enron. Wells Fargo took a huge hit with respect to reputation based on what they had determined was a cultural issue inside the company. And so you have to understand that this is going to get, I think, even more front and center. One of our institutional investors, they're only the 12th place, on our list of largest shareholders for our company. But their stake is smaller than they typically take. So they take a little over $1 million. And when they're in a company, they typically aim for about 8 million shares. Sorry, they have a little over 1 million shares. They usually shoot for about 8 million shares. So we know that there's room for them to continue to purchase us, but they came out very clearly and said, we're going to ask for and demand, your diversity statistics for your representation at your executive level, and also your representation throughout your organization if we're going to be an investor. And obviously it's not just about the diversity of your organization, but it's also about how inclusive is it. You can hire a bunch of people that look different, but if they're not all feeling like they can have that sense of belonging where they can come and bring their best selves to work, it's not really going to create the value that you're after. In addition to that, this is from the Stanford Graduate School of Business. A friend of mine, Charles O'Reilly, is a professor there, and he's done these studies for a very long time through his organization culture profile work. When you have culture by default versus a culture by design, how well do these companies perform over time? And so he studied this over 20 years. And if you look at the difference, it's pretty substantial. So, if you do have a strong culture, does it really matter? The answer is investors are asking about it because they know it actually creates value. But we're facing all this change, and this is from Bain. That if you know that there's change happening, and some of it might even be resisting, right? So, but only about 10%, just over 10% achieve or exceed the expectations of maybe operating in a new environment, because we've changed pretty dramatically, whether we wanted to or not, over the course of this last year. I don't know any business that hasn't had some pretty significant change, even if it's on growth. If you say, well, Amazon's doing great. Well, they've had to do things a lot differently, and their employees weren't exactly all thrilled about having to go in during a pandemic and doing the things that they needed to do. Every business, some of them might have had ups, but many had downs, and no matter what, all of them face some pretty significant change. Well, if you've decided that you're going to do something else, how are you making sure that you don't either fail to deliver the value that you were after, or that you don't dilute your company because you didn't prepare for the change effectively? So I want to stop here for a second, because my feeling, and we're starting to see it at ServiceMaster/Terminix, we really did do pretty well. If you look at our performance this year, we're really happy with our second quarter results. We recovered from first quarter decline, and as a result of the pandemic, and managed through it pretty well. And everyone was, when we did a survey 2.5-3 months ago, everyone was like, no, things are pretty good. I feel connected to my boss. I feel connected to my teammates. I feel more productive. There were a lot of positives. I actually think that there was still a little bit of denial there. I think we were kind of in the denial phase. This is harder than we probably thought 3 or 4 months ago. People are starting to get fatigued at being isolated, at not being together as a team. Productivity will start to slip. People will start to get frustrated. Oh, how are my ergonomics in my environment? My kids are going back to school, and they're all on the internet, and it's slowing my connection speed. I have childcare issues. I don't have a quiet place to actually have Zoom calls like this. And then you start to see this happen in the organization, and so it's an organization's responsibility to help their employees move through and then move on to whatever the new normal is. And so that's really, again, kind of connected to the culture change that you're going to need to offer as well. And so there's some things that you can do, to help people move through this quickly. But you have to be deliberate, and it's really all about the planning that's required to make that happen. One last thing before I get to the kind of the 4 key things I'd like to recommend everyone kind of think about is it's really that a victim loop will really hurt your ability to move through this. And so if you don't bring people along, particularly key opinion leaders who have strength in the organization with respect to their voice, if they're stuck in the victim loop and you don't pull people along, ignore, deny, blame, rationalize, resist, and hide can really damage your ability to move through. And so you want to get people up in the accountability loop as quickly as possible, recognizing what's happened, owning what they can to make a difference, forgiving the organization for not being perfect, and expecting perfection from the employer who's moving through change, or from customers who don't understand why you have to do things differently, and really kind of get to this take action and continue in that accountability loop. Really like this visual. Actually works well with kids too. If you have any at home, make sure that they're not stuck in the victim loop with respect to their schoolwork, or how they're going to college, or any of that stuff. So I find this is helpful in organizations as well as even in your family. So the 4 key things I'd like us to think about in making sure that you're cultivating the cultural connections that will make your company even stronger after some of the things that are happening. And this doesn't matter what size you are as an organization, or if you're not for profit, it absolutely doesn't matter. These things are really critically important. Number 1, you got to reconnect to your purpose. Is it still the same? There's a lot of change that just happened. Is this the right way to go? Then know where you are. I think it's really important right now to assess how effective your culture was and is, not just through the pandemic, but just before as well. Do you have a voice of the employee survey? Did you do any cultural diagnostics before? Have you done any surveys after the pandemic? Have you done any focus groups to check in with employees on how they're feeling? Knowing where you are will help you assess are you over time degrading or enhancing the culture that you have, and is it delivering the value that it needs to? But if you don't take a step right now, particularly all the change that we've experienced this year, if you don't stop right now and ask yourself kind of where are we, it's hard for you to know. You got to have that baseline. It's hard for you to know which direction you're going. A few months from now, when you're really saying, okay, look, how are our results? Where are we going? Third, you have to preserve your key capabilities, but you also have to build new capabilities as well. And it's important to understand which capabilities you have to preserve. What are the key most critical value drivers in your organization? I give an example all the time because I was at a company that didn't really understand who set price. Okay. You would imagine that pricing for a for-profit organization is a key value creator or destroyer. And when asked who sets price, everyone was kind of like, it's the product manager, is it the seller? It ended up being the customer in many cases. You don't want your customer setting your price, right? So that capability we had to build because we were going through a cultural change and how we actually operated our business model. But that, if you can imagine, going forward, if you don't have the key connectivity in a dispersed work environment where you are preserving that capability of setting price effectively, you could destroy value in your organization pretty quickly. You don't want to lose a capability that you built or that's critical to driving your business, but you want to take the opportunity to build new ones where new ones are required to operate in a new operating model. And I'll go over that in a second. And then this is simple. Many of you have, I'm sure, have seen Plan, Do, Check, Act. But going back to the basics on this specifically, and as it relates to culture, is critical. So planning on these items and then planning what you're going to change in the culture, doing it, then continuously checking on it and acting to adjust is going to be really important, because this change has been foisted upon us, and we've had to move very rapidly. Without some check-ins and continuous improving, you're likely to struggle to get through this, moving through and moving on as quickly as you can. So I like to use this specificically from Lafley's book, Playing to Win, because it really, for executives I work with, this is a great book. It doesn't get into culture, so I think I'm going to write the next add-on to it or something, because I think it's so important to carrying on the work that he's done here. But he really simplifies what a strategy is. And so strategic thinkers have done a really nice job looking ahead, but they have a hard time oftentimes communicating it where they're going to the organization. And then people who aren't as strategic thinkers, maybe they're better executors, they sometimes have a hard time taking a step back and creating a strategy. And so that's why I like the framework, because I think it works for really strategic minded people to communicate where they're going and why. And then it also brings those that are excellent at execution, helps them take a step back and define a strategy that then they can help drive the organization to completion. So starting with the vision, okay, why do you exist? So set the course. Why are you here? What's your mission? What's your vision? Why do you exist? What's the purpose? And then where are you going to play? And the really important thing here too is it's not just where you're going to play, but it also helps you decide where you're not going to play. Because if you try to do too many things, that can be a problem. Here is where I think this conversation gets moving, because how you win may have changed over the course of the last 8 months. And so what was successful before in the former normal, and then how do you win in the future? You could even think about some of these restaurants who were, let's take a quick service restaurant like Five Guys. Five Guys didn't have drive-thrus. Okay, well, Five Guys is figuring out how to do drive-thrus, because it's not the easiest thing to do when you don't want people. Some people don't want to come in. Curbside service, they adjusted to winning with that pretty quickly. But how do you make that a sustainable change? So then, key capabilities. What key capabilities are going to be required for your business in this new reality? Managing a dispersed team, a dispersed workforce is one of the key capabilities that is now going to become mandatory for any successful manager or executive. It's just going to be required because and then flexibility on how you manage that workforce. All the things that are going to be there, but you want to preserve the capabilities that you that make you successful and that continue to unlock value, while at the same time building new ones, as I mentioned before. And then the operating model, the who, what, when, and how work gets done, because that has changed as well. Lastly, really a winning culture, enables it, and I think it ties it all together because it brings that sense of belonging and how you're going to drive value. So starting with purpose. So this is where you take a step back. Is your purpose still the same purpose? I think it's important to remind yourself of that. And this is from Simon Sinek, whom I really love his stuff because he does great research. He's a great storyteller with respect to business. But starting with why is one of the best YouTube videos out there. I think that he's put out there for all of us to consume at any time, which I appreciate with him. But it really does say, look, why do you do what you do? What's the purpose behind your business or your organization? If it's a for-profit or not-for-profit, doesn't matter. You should have a purpose behind it. And then how do you do what you do, right? And, what's your unique selling proposition is what USP is. So what is that to the people that are buying your service or participating, in your mission? And what is it? What are your products or services? And a lot of people start with what? Well, here's my product. This is how I do it. Do you want to basically buy from me? But his argument is that you can change that pretty dramatically by starting with why. And so I think you have to ask yourself the why yet again. And so I know that we'll only be, the company I'm currently with is ServiceMaster together for a few more weeks because I'll be remaining with RemainCo with Terminix. But we have this was our mission, our vision, and it will remain ServiceMaster Brand's vision to create cleaner, healthier, safer environments for our customers wherever we are, home, work, or play. And so when we get to the why, okay, it really says, look, we believe there's great purpose in serving others. And we believe in caring deeply about those we serve. And we believe in doing what we say we're going to do, we deliver. And if you think about that for customers, employees, and the community, that's really where we were connected to that sense of belonging and purpose, because that was the why. That was our belief system. And if you can believe that and get behind it, and that will remain for them, and it remains in this pandemic era as well, because they had to take care of not just their customers as an essential service. All of us did across all of our brands. We had to take care of our employees in that environment, making sure that we didn't put them in an unsafe condition. I mean, if you turn on the TV in March, you thought if you went outside, you were going to die. So, I mean, people were going out there to serve customers in essential services. And so we had to make sure that they were safe. And on top of that, if you think about our essential services, we could have been an infector. We could have carried the virus to multiple locations because we serve multiple locations almost every time we walk out the door. We don't create any value unless it's through our people. We don't spray proprietary chemicals. We don't have a better way of cleaning. We don't have a better mousetrap. We literally, our shareholder value is created by the interactions with our employees and the customer at that point. And so we need to make sure that we're keeping them safe as well as our customers safe. So that purpose has resonated for us. So we don't have to necessarily change our purpose, but you may have to if you take a look at it. But I think it's helpful to see it that way. And then always have that foundation of values to drive the behaviors in your organization. So number two, when I said, where are you today? Here's a couple of models, and you don't need to get this fancy either, by the way. This was taking on a pretty big cultural change where we did this. One company was on the left that I was helping to drive a cultural change on, that we used the Denison model. And then on the right, two other companies where I was leading cultural change, including here at ServiceMaster, we used the organization culture profile from Dr. O'Reilly at Stanford. And I like them both. They both have a lot. The Denison model has a lot of research behind it. The OCP model had a high-tech focus on it for quite some time because it's where it's located there in Silicon Valley. But both are pretty effective at saying, look, this is where you are and this is where you need to be. And it helps you prioritize what changes you need to make sure that you're where you are. I like having a grounding so that you can, again, measure where you're going. You could do focus groups and a survey monkey and get at least a baseline. So I'm not trying to say you got to go out and do something fancy or spend a bunch of money on things. These are really helpful depending on the size of the organization or the gaps that you feel like you have. It's always good to know where you're starting from so that you can actually not try to boil the ocean on the things that you do need to change. Or you can also make sure that you're focusing on the core things that you need to preserve to prevail. So now it's starting to get into the planning, and I'm going to go through a lot of these slides pretty quickly, but I wanted to show you some examples of things that you should be thinking about. And I'm sure we can make this available in a PDF form for you guys to take a look at some other time too, so you can leverage the templates that are in here. But I threw some templates in here because there are reminders of the things you have to think about when you're planning well. And when you hear people say operating model, we do have to, that lexicon is becoming pretty common in corporate America, but I don't know if everyone really understands what it is. It's simple: who, what, when, and how work gets done. And it doesn't matter how big your company is. I actually had a conversation with the New Memphis and with some of the principals and administrators who were going through change themselves. And we applied some of these templates and tools to the discussion to say, hey, look, you're going from an in-classroom environment to a virtual environment. And think of all the stakeholders that you have. You have to really plan it out, because now I'm saying enterprise because it's larger for me. You got to keep the customer at the forefront. In school environment, it's the students really the customer, and yes, sometimes the parents are too, but it's really the students. Your output is really educated students at the end of the day. And so, what is it for your business? What value are you creating? What are you trying to do for the customer? And it's not just an org chart. An operating model is not an org design. That might be part of it, right? It's the structure, which is there at the top. But what key capabilities are going to help you deliver that operating model? How many resources do you need in each situation? Your business may have changed pretty dramatically. Ours here at ServiceMaster and Terminix, we had 3 different call centers, contact centers, one in Phoenix, one in Dallas, one in Tampa. We didn't think we'd ever be able to do that remotely. Or if we did, it would take 18 months of planning. We did it in 7 days. And so we figured out which capabilities we needed and then what resources we needed to make that happen. And now we're refining the resource alignment to help make sure that it's optimized. Decision-making forums. Sometimes you need to formalize those, so you're bringing people together to make the calls. Remotely, I believe this is becoming even more of a situation that will help connect people and keep people feeling like they're delivering value because they're included in the appropriate decision-making forums. Because right now, I think people, because they're not in the office, sometimes they're not included in some of the decisions that are being made in the organization, and that's driving some disengagement. And we're starting to see it in odd ways at ServiceMaster, where we'll send out a note about something that typically would have a lot of click-throughs. The click-throughs have dropped over the course of the last couple of months. That's where I think we're getting into that kind of fatigue and depression era. Decision-making is one of the key elements of engagement. If people think that they are contributing value, that they have a say, their voice is heard on some of the decisions, a decision-making forum really helps keep employees engaged because they feel like their job is adding value to the company. So I think now more than ever, formalizing certain decision-making forums becomes even more important. And I got a quick example of that. And then making sure that processes and accountabilities are clear. So when you start getting into the capabilities element, this is why I think planning is so important. This is an example of and it's been adjusted for ServiceMaster, but a group of my former colleagues in my last company out in California, they came together and created this, basically all the elements that they thought that were needs of our employees that might have an impact. And this is why on the capability side, in order to keep people connected, you can't pick all of these and fix them all at once, right? So you have to actually have some way to identify what are the most important factors, what are the most important uncertainties that you have to remove for people, or at least have that dialogue with them to make sure they understand what's happening. And so you're going after just the key ones you think on capabilities that you need to deliver for the organization. These are some thought elements here that, some thought starters that can help you reduce that funnel of the things that you need to do. But there's a lot to do, and if you don't plan it properly, you might try to boil the ocean. You might miss some pretty key elements. And so the other thing I'm adding here is from Gartner's D&I connection and how it drives inclusion. And that's become an even hotter topic today because of the social unrest that's happening in the U.S. and has an impact on, obviously, the corporate environment and communities throughout the United States. There are some key elements of driving all these things as well in this change, which also drives engagement. Which one of these are we going to pick? Here's 44 initiatives, right, that they put together in their inclusion index. Gartner did, and I think it's a good reminder for us. There's certain things that we do here at ServiceMaster, but there's other things that we don't. How does that become part of our culture connection moving forward in a at least through early next year? We're not going to be in the office all the time. We had over 700 people go to the One ServiceMaster Center before the pandemic hit, and now we might have 20% going to the office for the next several months, and we're just now building the plan to get that number back in the office somewhat regularly. So these things now become, okay, how do we actually continue to do this and make sure that we're connecting with our employees and helping to market that and communicate it so that they feel connected. Here's a decision-making forum example, and if you have a decision that's made pretty regularly, you see up on the template, it says frequency daily if you're doing weekly or monthly. But these things become important elements of keeping people connected. And how do they get involved in it? And making sure that if you're having a meeting, okay, what's the objective? What are the inputs and the outputs, and who is participating? And what decisions are clearly made there, so that you can actually have people engaged. Getting this formal, this seems basic, but it's really interesting that there are so many people who really value this sort of thing. Their brain works in a way that says, okay, here, help me out, help me what I'm responsible for and where I'm participating and how I'm delivering value. This is a big culture connector. It's business oriented. I understand that. It's not as soft as you would normally see, but this is a big driver because decision making is a big driver of engagement for employees. These are just examples of learning aids that we put in at a company I was doing a big culture change. This one in the top left was that pricing one I talked about. Those that understood the pricing process, they're the ones that thought it was going to make a big difference, and those that didn't think it would. And then once we educated them all, we made a big impact. So any change that you make on how you're operating with your teams, you have to continue to check in, because these learning guides were products of the checking that we were doing after we implemented some changes and realized that there wasn't enough understanding of what we were asking them to do. And so we acted on learning guides. They're simple. They're 2 slides. They're very simplified, and it really helps people understand what's next. This is a template that I think is also helpful if you're really truly changing the way you do things and saying, look, what are some of the behaviors we had before, and then really getting deliberate about what the to behavior is that's expected. And using this as a communication tool to your employees will really help them understand things. One from behavior is, butts and chairs equals productivity. That's a from behavior at almost any company I worked at. And so the to behavior is, focus more on output and outcomes, not on time in a chair, right? So because we're not sitting over everyone with a stopwatch all the time anymore, right? Just because they're there didn't mean they were productive before. So the to behavior is managers being more proactive about helping their employees understand what they needed to deliver. And so that gives them that sense of belonging as well. So better management through dispersed work teams, and not focused on butts and chairs, but really focused on the output that each employee is responsible to deliver, will change the culture in a positive way and keep people connected. Here's a customer impact as you change things and making sure that they know what it is you're doing differently. Because some people may feel a sense of loss on their prior connection to their customer. They might not be seeing them as much. They might not be flying to them as much. A lot of our salespeople on our corporate accounts, they get on a plane and go. we're asking them not to do that right now. And we're asking them to really think twice about it next year, because honestly, some of our profitability this year in ServiceMaster has been buoyed by the lack of travel. Okay, well, next year, if we just go back to normal, we're talking a significant amount of money that we, we'll then have to come up with somewhere else, because the expectations continue to soar every time you hit a number in the public market. So we have to think about that. So we're going to ask our employees to change. Well, what is that customer impact? It's important for them to know that, so that they feel like they're not going to be set up for failure in the next year. That is a cultural connection as well. If they don't feel like their company is setting them up for success, they're going to get disengaged. Understanding your employees, customers, executive, people managers. If you're changing something, how far do you have to move them? I think this is another example of thinking about it. And then what are you going to do about it? So if you know you have to move someone from strongly against to neutral, what is your what's the support gap, and then where's the resistance, and then how are you going to influence them to bring them along the change so that they can move through and feel again that sense of connectedness and important purpose with the company. So it's just another reminder of some of the things that you might need to think about as you're changing things in the organization. And I know that a lot of this it's not a hammer looking for a nail. You might not need all of these things, but it's the reminder that this is what thoughtful planning looks like when you're trying to keep people connected. And I'd strongly recommend, grabbing onto some of these and thinking about them. So just have a couple more, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. But this is one of my favorite tools. I've used it for a very long time, from back in my Six Sigma Black Belt days. But you think about process step. Each thing that we do there's a process associated with it. But there's some things in this one. It's I've added the start. That you oftentimes it's stop, stay, move. But in this new environment, you might have to start doing something differently. And so in the start situation, whomever in the org department has to start doing it. You want to identify what some of these things are. It can be really helpful to understanding, how much work needs to go in to prepare for a new process in the new environment. And then if you're pitching something from one organization, you have to expect someone to catch it. And the pitch catch tool is given at a formal meeting where you're talking about, here are the process activities, and I'm pitching it from one organization to another and making sure that they're there to catch it. Lastly, I think, there's two more. So the FMEA risk assessment, this is a failure modes effects analysis, and thinking about your employees and keeping them connected. Well, what could possibly go wrong? What are you going to do if an internet fails? Is that a big deal? What if their laptop PC fails? How are they going to get that repaired? Those sorts of things that you have to think about. And then what if an employee disengages? One of your higher performers all of a sudden isn't there, shuts off their camera all the time, isn't engaging. What's going on? How are you going to deal with that? What are the things that you're going to think about? How are you helping your managers keep that employee engaged, and helping them actually first identify when they may be disengaging? Because that might actually be part of the issue. The manager might not even know which signs to look for. So when you do a risk assessment like this, you find out, if I look at the severity, occurrence, and detection, here's my risk priority number. If you get a bunch of employees, or just a small team, and the employees start disengaging, you can severely impact the productivity of that or of the organization, because these people have just started to check out because they don't feel a sense of belonging. This will help you figure out ways to keep people engaged, because it's identifying the big risk. And it ultimately comes down to communication, right? You just have to keep communicating. I myself have been doing huddles every 6 weeks with my entire organization. We did a town hall. We're doing the pretty regular email communications, but nothing is a substitute for smaller group meetings, smaller listening sessions. After the George Floyd situation, we had a listening session. CEO, myself, our head of community and diversity and inclusion, sat down and listened to employees, over the course of a little over a week. And what we heard there really opened our eyes. And so those sorts of things are really important. It's a way for executives to get away from executive quarantine, not COVID quarantine, but executive quarantine that occurs even worse in these situations. Last thing I'll say is this, being honest, intellectually honest with yourself about all these things that you're trying to go through and the things that you've changed to try to stay connected. Do you really have all these things understood? I think is another good reminder. So with that, I'll stop here at the summary pages. I know I gave you a lot in a pretty short period of time, but I really think number one, reconnect to the purpose. Make sure your purpose didn't change, because that's actually why a lot of people feel that sense of belonging at the very beginning. It's probably why they chose to come to your organization, and oftentimes why they choose to stay. Did that change in this time? Where are you? Know where you are, so that you can actually understand if over the next few months or next year, are you getting worse or are you getting better? It's a good way to measure how you're performing, because that could be the early indicator that your business is starting to fail. And then make sure that you're preserving those absolute key value creators that you think is your special sauce with respect to the capabilities, and then build new ones, especially if those have changed, that were key, have gone away. So build those new capabilities and be deliberate. Lastly, I can't stress this enough. It is really about execution, plan, do, check, act. That's a really critically important thing to do. So with that, I'll open it up for questions.
Well, thank you, David. That was fantastic. You really gave us a good food for thought and some nuggets that we can take back for our business. I particularly enjoyed hearing about how a great culture can drive great financial performance, and that's something that all businesses can work on. And as you were speaking, it resonated with me that one of the best things we can do is to continue to inform and discuss openly with our team our mission, our core values, our purpose, and really kind of look for ways to recognize those and celebrate when our teams are demonstrating those values. Another thing that had occurred to me is that when you were speaking, is that to really encourage our teams to each person think about their cultural accountability and how we can all be responsible for that, to really continue to drive that culture connection. So thank you for that. And so now we're going to open it up for some Q&A, and I'm going to look and see what I can see here. Here's the first question for you, David. What would you suggest for an employee to do if they notice their manager becomes disengaged?
That's a really good question. The first thing, actually, especially if you have the courage to do so, and I hope individuals would, but it's really asking if they're okay. I mean, it's sometimes as simple as that, is saying, hey, look, hey, do you have some time? Put a one-on-one on their calendar and say, hey, look, I'm just checking in with you. I wonder if you're doing all right. Checking in on each other in times like these is actually really an empathic way to drive a connection, and can really make people feel like they're valued as well. So I think it starts there. Secondly, if you have an HR department and one that's one that you can trust and that you have confidence in, reaching out to them to say, I'm wondering about our engagement in our team. I just, could you, help us a little bit, kind of think about being connected, and in a way that actually helps them just kind of reach out and say, hey, look, can we do some activities? Can we have some thoughts about how to stay connected? And lastly, if you're not getting the response and it's starting to impact the team a little bit, I mean, I really do think skip levels are, one of those things that you reach out to your manager's manager. And as an ally is one of the terms that Khalil Jameson taught me a long time ago, where they talk about listen as an ally and challenge as an ally. So if there is something that's happening and you are concerned about your manager being disengaged, going to that next level in a way that's looking to help, not to harm and undermine, can still be effective. So I think it really starts with one-on-one interaction. It's giving the manager a call, or getting on a video call with them like this.
I think that's great, David. And sometimes I think managers may not realize that the perception of the team is their reality. And they would welcome that an employee come to them out of concern that they've noticed something different. So I really love that advice. Here's another good question. Do you have any specific advice for a fast growth company that's consistently changing and pivoting, and the stress that would create for the team?
Yeah, it gets down to because it's a little bit different than like pandemic talk, or kind of how this year has been so tumultuous. It's in that high fast-paced environment it's you have these shifting priorities. I had the great pleasure working for a company that went from 3 billion in revenue to 15 billion revenue in 7 years, and so now that's a different scale, and there were thousands of employees, but we were constantly evolving. I think the thing that we reminded ourselves of, and it started with the history of that company when it was nothing. They had 65 people in the first couple of years, and they grew to about 200. And they took the founding CEO, George Rathman, out in the parking lot after work on Friday, because they used to have beers on Friday at 4:00. And they said, we're too big. We're getting too big, because they were 65 for so long. We're getting too big. Things are changing so much. We can't stay engaged. We don't even know everybody anymore, because there were over 200 people. And George Rathman said, hey, listen, we're a for-profit company. It's our responsibility to grow. But what's on the employees and on the leaders of this employment group, our company, is that you employees need to stay true to our values. Work in teams, ensure quality, trust and respect each other. Those were core values that they had as a company at the very beginning of who they were. They defined their core values, and they said, you stick to those and we'll get through all this other stuff together. Now, I think when you're making changes, I think some of it comes back to the practicality of applying some of the tools that are out there that I just showed. But it really comes down to, I think, leading with the values and making sure that the employees know it's their responsibility to continue to anchor themselves around those as you continue to change and grow, because that is a responsibility of a for-profit company, particularly if you're in the public markets.
So another question kind of similar to that is, during an acquisition, what's the best way to bridge two cultures when they may not be a great match at first glance?
Yeah, and if you look at where most of the large acquisitions that are out there have failed, they almost always, the Harvard Business Review article that talks about it afterwards, it was because they didn't bring the cultures together. That's one of the hardest parts of integration. And again, I think it really does take some pretty unique type of leadership. If your culture, if your culture is so different from the one you're acquiring, you really need to have that in mind at the very beginning, because if you believe that your culture is a important value creator, you're asking them to change everything about how they do their work. And so first of all, you got to go into that with that knowledge. So you should be doing a cultural assessment on them and where the gaps are. And there are some pretty good tools with that, where they say, okay, this is where we are, this is where they are, and you have them self-assess where they are on some of these things. And so if there's a strong focus on KPIs and driving to key performance indicators and goals and objectives, and it's very clear every quarter, it's a heavy operating company. And this is more like, no, it's more free flowing, and that right there is going to be a massive cultural difference. And so assessing it up front. But if that did not occur, then I do believe it's really important for the leaders of the company to come together and actually have an honest conversation of debating, shaping, and articulate the desired culture going forward. Depending on the size, if it's a merger of equals or something like that, you have to deliberately, by design, go out there and say, here are the things that we want to preserve, and then here are the things that we need to transform to prevail, to come together. And if you don't do that work, eventually it's going to show up in the organization with disengagement. So my preference is to make sure I understand that eyes wide open, and I might walk away from an acquisition if we're so far apart culturally, because it's going to be so hard to bring them together. But if you make that decision, despite the differences, the leadership of the company needs to come together to debate, shape, and articulate what we're going to be going forward. And there might require some changes of the acquirer to help accommodate some of the belief systems of the other culture.
Now, I think I love what you just said just then, is that you've really got to find, it's kind of like yours, mine, and ours. How do we bridge these cultures so that we both maybe give a little bit and come up with maybe even a better culture in the end? So that's awesome advice. I have another question. I'm going to kind of merge these questions together. What advice do you have for building a consistent culture across multiple locations? And then how do you keep folks working from home connected, especially when they don't have an office they can visit very often?
So the first part of the question, that takes again design. So you take I'll give you the ServiceMaster example. ServiceMaster years ago was founded with the purpose of honoring God in all we do. And some number of years ago, a CEO came in and said, you know what, we can't do that. It's not as inclusive. We're not a faith-based organization anymore. Even though a lot of our employees and a lot of our franchisees had actually chosen to be a part of ServiceMaster specifically because it was a faith-based organization. And so they did away with honor God in all we do, and they didn't replace it with anything. So they didn't say, this is what our purpose is after that. They just said, here's our values. But they didn't say what the purpose was. So then it became maybe about making money. And what that ended up happening is you then had culture by franchisee. It was about 2,000 of those, and then 340 branches at Terminix, culture by branch, which is, in my opinion, culture by accident or culture by default, which then became, depending on how good or bad the branch manager was, or, what good leader he or she was, how did they set the cultural tone in the branch? That's what we relied on. So we embarked on a cultural transformation activity where we used the OCP, we used the organization culture profile. We did voice of the employee surveys where we had them before. We looked at focus groups of franchisees, of customers, of branch managers, of technicians, of salespeople. We had these focus groups that said, okay, this is that debating and shaping that we talked about. And so we had our commitments: we serve, we care, we deliver, and we had our values, and we started there. And we asked ourselves, what does it look like, feel like, sound like? And so that we could have them understand this is what perseverance looks like, feels like, sounds like. And when we see it in the environment, to say, this is what, oh yeah, perseverance is a big part of our culture. We actually we make it work no matter what happens, right? And then humility was another big one, because we are a very humble business. We serve other people. If you don't like serving people, you should not work at ServiceMaster, period. Terminix or ServiceMaster brands, either one. And so we had to make that clear. And what we did to help the branch managers with that, and the divisional vice presidents and the regional directors, is we give them dialogue toolkits to help them with it. Because a lot of people may have wanted to help lead the cultural change. They didn't know how to have the conversation with their employees. So we gave them the questions to ask. We gave them some thoughts on how to design some activities. We also trained culture keepers, which not just culture leaders, but culture keepers, which were individual contributors, technicians, and salespeople across the organization. Over 300 of them we trained on why do we doing culture by design? Because we have 11,000 people at this company. And so it was important for us to make sure that we were actually teaching at a grassroots level what good culture looks like and what by design looks like. So it was a pretty big activity. Now that's at scale. Even if you have 3 locations or 4, you have to kind of do the same thing. You have to be clear about your commitments, the purpose, the values. This is how I expect them to behave. And then make sure that some employees who are maybe the key opinion leaders are understanding that and helping, kind of recognizing them as some culture stewards, and then make sure the branch managers know, what that really looks like, or the location managers knows what great looks like from a cultural perspective. Sorry, the second part to your question was remote. So a lot of that was sprinkled in the conversation. It really is about connectedness. You really do have to create the environment where they feel like they're coming in, even if they're not. And some of them might be having a really difficult time with that, because technology might not be okay for them, meaning they might not have a quiet place to have a meeting, because their kids are in the house and there's 3 of them and they're all on their own meetings. And I mean, there are some serious challenges that we're facing. If you're a manager of others, you're checking in with your direct reports on a very frequent basis, way more than you were before, I think is more important in this era today, where we are remotely working. And on top of that, I think it's critically important when we look at onboarding and we look at ongoing training of managers or new managers, what we're focusing on at ServiceMaster is building managing dispersed teams module, so that there's things that we can pull off of what we have is called LinkedIn Learning, but it's more important for us to actually build some of what works directly for us. And so that we are training them how. We can't just say, okay, go be a remote work manager, you know, and you don't give them any tools, no learning capability to say, this is what good looks like for this. A lot of that was sprinkled in the conversation that we had today, but, you know, I think there's more opportunity out there to build something that makes sure you're building that capability of managers keeping their employees engaged.
I love your term, culture keepers. You know, I'm thinking of cheerleaders in the company that help reinforce the culture beyond just the management or the team. So I love that you've offered that term for us. Another question came up is, do you have any specific authors or books that you recommend around culture?
You know, I love a lot of the stuff from Simon Sinek. You know, I mean, I think he really gets into the way culture's evolved over the course of the last, 15 years or so inside the corporate environment. There's a few. There's one organization culture. It's a little bit dated, my God, I'm blanking on the guy's name right now too, who's the author. So I'll have to pull it out. But that one, it really gets into. He's basically the father of the organization by design. But he talks about how to create that. What are the artifacts in the organization on around culture, and how do people hold on to those? How do you actually get them to shift and let go of their artifacts, and how do you create that change and impetus to change, by increasing the survivability fear to a spot where say, okay, I have to move. It's really interesting book. So, I'd have to get back to the group on that specifically. It's kind of blanking on me now, but Sinek, I read quite a bit of his stuff, and that's kind of really resonated with me.
Yeah, I'm looking at a Simon Sinek book right here, Leaders Eat Last. I also enjoy his work. So we do have several more questions. I know our time is running short. One additional quick question is, will we be able to have your slides? David, will you be sharing those out with us or with the chamber?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I'll just throw it into a PDF format, or maybe I should just keep it PowerPoint. So in the event that you guys just want to copy the templates, if you think they're of any use, I do find them useful in certain projects. I don't apply them to every single thing, right? But I'm happy to share them out.
Now, what you shared today was just fantastic, and many of our companies may not have had the resources and tools that you've had available. So sharing that, I think, would be just awesome. And just thank you so much, David, for today and your time and your investment into this presentation, and to everyone for attending. We'd also like to invite everyone to join us next week, September 17th at noon. We'll hear from a panel of CEOs and executives. We'll have Kim Jenkins with Ortho South, Kara Jackson with IMC Global, Bob Wilson with H Saga, Scott Stafford with Evolve Bank, and Quentin Robinson with Cigna. And they too will share how they keep their culture connected. So thank you again, David, so much. And thank you, everyone. And have a great afternoon. And we'll see you again soon.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye now.